So I want to start with a huge thanks to Stratford's Great Big Green Week organising team, with particular thanks to Janet Palmer for keeping the wheel on this road for this event, and indeed for the whole week. It's just a spectacular amount of organisation. A huge thanks also to Robin Ford and Katie and the team here at Cram Plaza for kindly hosting and helping us organise today's event. We're here thanks to them, and it's a brilliant venue, a smashing room. There's a bar in the corner even, and if you need a bit of fresh air, there's even a little place you could go outside to in the break. So Stratford's astonishing Great Big Green Week programme delivered well over 40 events. I don't have the final number. Their food for thought for the topic Rupert Reed will address in his keynote speech, which is already up there. That will be at 2. Climate change is accelerating. Are we preparing for it? And many of the events related to local food, jobs, energy and well-being through the week. So my personal Great Big Green Week journey started the week before, because there are now too many things to fit into the week. And I went to a brilliant film and discussion hosted by Olivia Hatch and team called Power Station. And it self-describes as a scalable, in-your-face prototype of community-led power, turning a street and a school solar with, I quote, community spirit and resilience at its heart. Next, having donated my push bike to charity because cars take up too much space, I took an actual bus ride rather than Michael Clifford's very enjoyable bike bus through beautiful countryside to Meon Vale Village Hall, and it is still gorgeous from the bus. At the launch event, local sustainable garden designer Lucy Hartley passed on some useful tips, and my favourite was use recycled Hessian sacking and not plastic underlay to control weeds. So I shall be doing that henceforth. Unfortunately, I didn't get organised in time to take a broken zip to the Repair Cafe, a regular thing run by a partnership of the Stratford Town Trust and the Net Zero Hub. At the Nourish and Flourish workshop in Lifeways Community Centre, I planted radishes and I helped with strawberry bed weeding, and I was inspired to think about crop rotation as possible even in my tiny garden, and took away a recipe idea from a cooking demonstration. Katie Beswick's guided Quite Wild plant walk, starting from the lovely cafe in a railway carriage on the Greenway, opened our eyes to abundance even along the edges of a car park, although she did warn us to go back away from the edges because of potential particulate pollution. Rosemary Collier, the chair of our afternoon panel today and leader of SWAN, South Warwickshire Area Network for Wildlife, led an enjoyable, informative walk via a local wood and hedges, hosted by Dave Passingham, and it ended in the local pub in Stretton-on-Foss, as all good things do. And I also arrived at that hedge assessment via a play reading, a reading of a cracking play by Roger Harding, who's there in the audience, Roger Harding and Company, just that morning, by Brad Birch, a hero of the people, and that was in our local library. So how I spent my time in the course of Great Big Green Week hints at what adaptation and resilience mean to me. Getting out into green spaces to de-stress, looking after the natural environment and biodiversity, lots of opportunities for socialising, not unlike today, enjoying good local food in local establishments, eating well without many food miles where possible, staying physically fit, not having to travel by car, active enjoyment of local culture in our local libraries. All of these activities, in fact, connect to the subject matter of our first panel, which is a question: how do we strengthen community resilience in food, jobs, energy and well-being? Today, we'd love to know what this question means to you, and with me to help us think about this are Olivia Hatch, District Councillor, business owner and chef, Dr. Lopamudra Saxena, Coventry University, whose research is at the intersection of food geography, sustainability and community resilience, Patrick Mulvany, who is from Rugby's hyperlocal Eco Hub, and Helen Mitchell, who is a local activist and nurse. So I want to start by asking each of you, in no particular order, what resilience means to you and how that connects to what matters in your daily life. So who'd like to kick off?
I can go if you like. So for me, it's always this sort of constant conflict in my head between the things that the film The Power Station inspired, the sort of community resilience, openness, community ownership, and then the sort of forces that invade that space of central government, the social media, and the far right that you constantly sort of battling out of your head that we have to address because we can't be in a bubble. So in my sort of I've sort of got two hats on here. One as a district councillor, and the sort of main activity, I suppose, as a district councillor, you're dealing with what the Stratford District Council works on, and you're also involved with my ward is Shipston North, and there's a sort of conflict there too. But obviously, the big thing that the district council is involved with, and I don't want to talk too much now because I think we will probably talk about it this afternoon, is the South Warwickshire local plan, which is supposed to be bringing us sustainable development. And that is where the sort of external forces, however much we want to bring joined up thinking and sustainable development, and we're supposed to be getting devolution, i.e. powers are supposed to be becoming more local. It feels like, well, they are being taken away from us. And we are being told how many houses to build. Even planning committee down the road, planning committees the powers are being taken away from planning committees. So local decision making is getting worse, not better. So which points me to again towards this power station, and my local area, North Shipston, is really taking control community-wise, and I'm hoping that there is a growth of community benefit societies in Stratford district. There is one in Stratford. I don't know if anybody knows that, called Stratford Regeneration, and that is taking. I'm not a part of it, and I just know it exists. It's specialising in taking over redundant and empty retail spaces and working with the planning authority to getting permission for people to live on the second floor and for workspaces to be on the ground floor, and for them to become more efficient and retrofitted, etc. So that's sort of, in a very brief nutshell, a district councillor role. And then as a sort of business and chef, obviously food is very important to me. And food resilience to me is food security and making food chains smaller for us to become more connected to where our food becomes. I mean, we have been talking about this for many years, and I don't know if it's getting better or worse. And again, the sort of external forces come in the shape of trade agreements and how we are producing, for instance, less beef in this country, but that doesn't mean that the global beef consumption has gone down. It means that people are eating Australian beef here, and that's just crazy. So again, in fact, there's a district council grant about to come out for food security. So if anyone is involved in any, and we had the sort of round table about it, we had the Ken Kennett Centre Community Kitchen coming to talk, and that is a brilliant example of dealing with food waste, being open to everyone, and almost the most as important as all those things, people having fun and enjoying their community space and getting to know their neighbours. So for me, the key thing about food security is we should all be growing more fruit and veg, and that is very poorly supported by government. There's no grant schemes or anything for it, but I think I've spoken enough, so for now.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. I think you've left the conversation at a very ideal point for me to follow up on, because that's exactly what I do in my research role as a social scientist. In my research, I actually look at what is food resilience. And as you outlined, some of the initiatives that we have, a lot of initiatives, a lot of ideas, but somehow they don't get translated into practice. So my research is around how do you bridge this gap between having the answers and actually implementing it, between research, policies, and practice. So my work is actually, as a researcher, I focus on food, what is called food geographies. It's actually about how food is produced, where, how it is moved, how it is governed, and how it actually relates to inequalities and the complexity of the environment. So my research, as a researcher, that's been my area. And I also mentioned I worked on community kitchens and what the roles are of community kitchens, what can we do at a community level. And my focus has been largely on community-centered, community-led initiatives and how they fit into the bigger questions. What is their key role? How they can work better with local authorities, and also the sort of links that they can have at a horizontal level across the city and also vertically up and down. So that's been so it's good to know. And obviously, as a researcher, my interest is in looking at what enables these sort of initiatives, what are the barriers. We have all these excellent ideas and initiatives, but somehow we don't seem to put them into practice. So what is the reason, and how as a researcher I can contribute to understanding what the issue is, and also come up with actionable plans and come up with evidence. So that's part of my role as a researcher. So it's always interesting for me to explore research questions, which could be posed at different levels of the community, as well as at other levels at the local authority level. And in my other role, I live in Coventry, so I'm not from Stratford, so I'm very fascinated to understand what strategic actions are being taken here. But I'm very much part of Coventry's food network. We have a Coventry food network, and also one of the founding trustees of Feeding Coventry, which is a charity in Coventry which looks at equitable access to food by vulnerable groups. So so I'm interested in how Coventry can be made into a much more sustainable and resilient city. So I work with other partners and community organizations. So for me, resilience, I think Julie asked us what resilience actually means in my work. It's actually looking at the capacities of the food system and the communities which are embedded in that food system to anticipate risks, to prepare for those risks, to absorb or adapt or cope or to transform. So the capacities and the capabilities that we need as communities in order to anticipate what sort of risks are coming up, and to prepare for both living good lives now as well as in the future. So that's how I see resilience in my work on food systems. Yeah, thanks. Now over to Helen.
Thank you. So I'm here, I feel, as a human, and I'm thinking more in lines of personal resilience. And as a mother, I have 3 well, my oldest is 20 teenagers. I'm really conscious of young people today, and so part of, within our family, we actually home educated. And I think that's been really significant for my children in their sort of attitude to life, that they're willing to try anything. And as a nurse in the NHS, we could have a whole conversation about sustainability and so on. But again, on a human level, I spent a lot of time talking to patients about how they could help their own healthcare. And obviously food's a massive part of that, but also just, our environment generally, green spaces and so on. What's good for the planet is also good for our health, it's good for our mental health. And I work in A&E, so I'm really on the ground with, weather changes, climate changes, and being resilient there. We really see a difference in what's happening in the weather and what comes in through the door on that particular day.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon, sorry. Time's moved on. I'm Patrick Mulvany. I'm a trustee of the newly fledged Rugby Eco Hub, been around for about 18 months. And we also had a power station film last Tuesday, really powerful, very, very energizing. We sort of work under the mantra of our 5 R's, which is reduce, helping people have a lower footprint. Reuse, we operate a library of things so people can borrow rather than buy. Repair, our bi-monthly repair workshop cafes, highly popular, and we kept, I think, 80% of the stuff that comes in, no, nearly 90% of the stuff that comes in out of landfill. And recycle, we help people, guide people in the maze of what you can recycle, where and how, and compost and all the rest of it. And regenerate, and we do stuff on localized food growing. We had a lovely workshop Saturday, and not yesterday, but the week before. Lovely workshop showing how you can grow food in small containers, and the response from the public was absolutely wonderful. People who just never dared to do stuff because it was too difficult, and just saw that you can put seeds in and plants in more or less anything. So anyway, it's very successful. So that's where I'm coming from. And on the issue of resilience, I'll mention later a little bit more about a fantastic study done by a friend of mine called Tim Lang on community food resilience. And it's a massive report, 380 odd pages. I won't tell you to read it. And in that, he uses most of one chapter with all the definitions of resilience, what it means to different groups of people. It's a humongously complicated topic, and one has to personalize it and bring it down to what it actually means for you, I think. And my personal one is that, gosh, it's nearly 60 years ago, as a student of, have to say, green revolution agriculture, I had the opportunity to go to southwest Ethiopia to see one of the most food productive landscapes in the world in the southwest. It's based on the phos banana and set and so forth. And it was so brilliantly organized and had been sustained for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it just, my epiphany, just changed my view of what can be done. So when I came back from there, green revolution out, look at something else to do, I did that for the rest of my life. And I think what I'd say coming out of that was that for me personally, and indeed the people I work with and organisations I've helped and worked with over the years, resilience of the 3 things. One is all about diversity, biodiversity. It's all about making sure that, you know, in the food landscape, things are very biodiverse. That makes them more resilient. It's all about agency. It's all about making sure that people are able to control what they're doing and to have choices which are meaningful to them, and also provide that diversity and range of foods which are healthy, etc. Which equates, in my mind, to food sovereignty. Everybody knows about that. That's all about local control of food systems, shorter supply chains, etc. And thirdly, it's all about those who would intend to control our lives, be it local councils, right up to governments and international organisations, recognising that everybody has the right to food. Everybody has the right to high quality food. And it's not correct to interpret that as leftovers for the left out. We're talking about agency, about having the right to proper food. I've wrapped it on too far, but that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, we probably should use both mics, shouldn't we? So what was quite interesting to me about all of that is it's very much about humans. And actually, Rosemary is on the second panel today because I wanted to make absolutely sure that nature got a look in. You've kind of mentioned it indirectly, but how important do you think caring for the natural environment is? How should resilience be built in there? And would anybody like to take that? We don't have to go in the same order, or we can.
Okay. Well, I suppose the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is opening access to nature, because I can't remember the statistic, but it's something like 10% of the population in this country own 70% of the land. It's some real shocking statistic, and people aren't going to care about nature if they don't have access to it. So that what I see as the most important thing. The government has done something. I think they've done it. They've said they were going to do it. I don't know if it's been done yet. But opening the land registry so that everybody can see who owns what, and that will go to some way. And if you're interested in that, then you can follow Guy Shrubshall and the I've forgotten what the movement is called, but there's a movement to have the same access in England that Scotland do to land. I think there was something else I wanted to say on that, but it's gone. I can't mention it again.
Yeah, I think caring for the natural environment is absolutely key and core to resilience, because clearly it forms the basis for living. It's the basis for life, subsistence. And of course, it's key to, because I work on food resilience, so food is the lens through which I see caring for the environment goes side by side with making sure that we have food, and equally healthy and nutritious food, not only for the generations existing now, but also for future. And I think I think the major issue has been when we started thinking of nature as different from us, human beings and communities. It's therefore in many ancient societies which we still have, and there's so much to learn, where actually nature and communities, they coexist. So we are part of nature. So therefore caring for the nature is not something outside of caring for yourself, caring for ourselves. They are one and the same thing. They're the two sides of the same coin. But somehow over time we have been disconnected from that thinking that nature is just there for us to extract resources from and not really to take care. But what we have been learning, and over time we have acknowledging more and more now, that for sustainability, for resilience, we need to protect and care for our nature just as we care for our own families. That seems so obvious to everyone that you wouldn't even think twice if somebody asks, would you care for your family? It's a no pressure. No one even thinks of asking that. But when it comes to nature, it's somehow we seem to see it as something distinct from ourselves. And so that's where the gap has been. And I guess the most of our effort now is how do we reconnect people with nature in different ways at different levels, at individual level, household level, community level, regional, national. How do we make sure that these connections are embedded in our everyday lives, because it shapes our everyday life through not just through food, but obviously the air we breathe, the water we drink. These are all part of environment and very much key to our lives actually. So ironically, we seem to have disconnected ourselves and think of taking care. It's not taking care of something else. You're taking care of yourselves. So basically, it's us together. So I think it's extremely key, and all of us are here together because we see it's something that we really have to embed in our everyday thinking and working.
I think as well, we need to look globally at this. Obviously, the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. But as part of my nursing role recently, I've been working in Calais with people seeking safety, and we have huge numbers of people who are not able to live because nature is depleted because of various different reasons. But I think we need to factor in people, migration, and refugees as part of nature depletion as well.
Well, absolutely. Carrying on that more international view, we are but one species among millions, as you know. What are there? 400,000, slightly fewer flowering plants, slightly less number of animals, millions and millions of bacteria and fungi and mycorrhizae and all that kind of stuff in this little planet in the solar system, in the Milky Way, which we call home. And so I spent a year some time ago working with an American NGO on their agroecology strategy. And one of the things that came up in terms of their communication with their membership, which is huge across the States and internationally, Heifer International, was this image. If the Earth were the size of an apple, the biosphere in which all life lives is as thin as the peel of the apple. 10 kilometers up, 10 kilometers down. That's it. And if you want to get down to plant-based stuff, it's 6 inches of soil. We either care for that or we do not exist. So it is for me absolutely essential. And if I may, can I segue into the next question? So what would happen if nature had a voice at the table? And some of you may be aware there's a Convention on Biological Diversity set up after the Earth Summit. It staggers on doing quite good stuff and pointing good directions about how we can do better to preserve biodiversity. The one element with which I worked for nearly 30 years was on what we called agricultural biodiversity. And agricultural biodiversity is the biodiversity in that part of the ecosystem, biosphere, which we use to provide our food and fibre and pharmaceuticals and various other products. And it is massive in terms of the overall impact that humans have. It is a massive area. And would you believe it? For all of the work that's been done and the resolutions that have been passed and the importance that's been given to protecting, preserving, maintaining, and indeed improving, increasing, enhancing agricultural biodiversity, the pushback from industry is absolutely massive. And in the recent agreement that was concluded a couple of years ago, it hardly says anything. It says maybe agroecology might help, but then we have to have sustainable intensification as well. We have to have big business. So having nature at the table is absolutely important. Lots of people try to do that. The pushback is absolutely massive. But I think if we don't do that and make sure that it is absolutely centre stage in all our decisions, housing, planning, health, water, food, we are headed towards a mass extinction of ourselves.
Thank you.
I
So,
think Helen turned it off.
you're just trying to shut me up, aren't you? So, at this point, I just want to see if there are any questions or comments from the audience. And while you're thinking about that, what I am going to do, it's very easy. I don't know about you, but I find you can become downcast quite quickly when we talk about climate change and biodiversity. And just listening there to Patrick's comment, he's absolutely right. People have been working enormously hard at this since the early 90s, and particularly on biodiversity, very little seems to be happening. And I can't see why agroecology wouldn't happen, but it seems to be happening very slowly. So I just want to change gears slightly and say we're sitting here at the end of an amazing week, more than 40 events. Janet, do you know how many there were actually? About 50. There you are. So I'm way behind. So some things must be going right. So what do you think is going right in your area? We'll try and get a little bit more upbeat. I'm happy to return to the other question later, but we're obviously trying to work our way through these huge challenges. So biodiversity decline, climate change, inequality, all of these have actually come onto this table already. What are we getting right that might help us go in the right direction?
I
suppose one thing we haven't mentioned is energy, and that is one area that I suppose we are going in the right direction of, and also the government have made it much easier for community energy schemes to start, and there's an expression of interest open at the moment. So I would say energy is probably the one. Obviously, we have lots of solar farms being opened at the moment, and they're a bit, the community energy wave is behind, and a lot of the solar farms are very corporate and with the profits being extracted from the community. And if the community energy movement could catch up and keep those profits within the community, then that would also change the public opinion of this movement. And I think suddenly everybody would get on board.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, it is quite right that there's so much, there's success definitely at the energy level. But even in terms of food, I think one thing which is going right, I would say there are a lot of community food projects actually across the country, in small places, bigger places, medium places. It's just that we do not know enough about where they are, but they do exist when you go to different places. You realize there are many successful, they may be small in scale, but they are trying to create change in their local communities. As you mentioned about community food growing, there are community kitchens being set up. So there is, I think what is going right is maybe finally after years of decades of denial, the government is slowly getting around to the fact. And this is actually also reflected in the Tim Lang's report that Patrick mentioned, that we are terribly unprepared for national food resilience, but there is slowly it is sinking in after years of denial. And so there are a number of things happening at local, citywide levels. I would say I come from Coventry, so we have now local climate change strategies forums, and I'm sure you are part of it as well. That's why we are all here. So I guess what's going right is that there are more bottom-up efforts now in place, more communities getting involved in how to take part in decisions. Of course, it is uneven. It is uneven across different places. It's not in certain places. I find that communities are much more well prepared, well equipped. They have the knowledge, they have the skills, and in certain areas it is very, very basic, and they are not. There's not much awareness actually of what is happening around them. But for me, in terms of my research, which takes me to different parts of the country, I have seen really very inspiring community projects where they're doing a lot of work around community food growing, especially. And there's a big movement now how to transform public food procurement, for example. I'm involved with one of the research projects which we are looking at how can public food procurement be turned into a lever for actually strengthening community resilience. How can we make school meals better? So there is a lot of focus. There's definitely research going on different aspects of how we can change the way things are being done earlier and how we can think differently and do differently. And as I said before, there are a lot of findings in research, but they don't get translated into practice. So looking at the certain local authorities and councils which are quite proactive, and some are still very, waiting for something to happen before they can react. So it's quite uneven, but as Julie rightly said, sometimes focusing on what's not happening doesn't really help us. We have to focus on what's happening positively at different places and try to learn from those initiatives. And I think we can do a lot by learning from each other. There are activities going on, there are initiatives. It's just that sometimes we lack a joined up approach, which I'm sure you might have found in Stratford as well. We find in Coventry there are lots of things happening, but nobody really has an understanding of how they connect with each other or how much they're benefiting communities and in what ways. So that's one thing. And I think personally, I felt when I have interacted with local councils, I see a change in their perspective, in their thinking, and possibly, yeah, like having Olivia, for example, you are very much, in the know about how things need to change. So I think we have now councillors in different places, and that's my hope that they can drive forward the plans for how we can work together, because I don't think it's any particular individual or sector's responsibility. Unless we work together, with the public authorities, the businesses. I know businesses have concentrated that part, but then maybe bringing them into discussions and debates would be very critical, because things will not change without them understanding what is benefits them. So they have to be brought into the debate. I've always argued that we always blame them for most of the things, but they're not part of the discussion. So we have to somehow make sure that they are in these discussions and debates around how do we change the ways we see food as, or environment as, for that matter. So I see a change in thinking, a change in policy making, a change in communities' level of energy and commitment to do something. And I guess that's where I would focus more, without undermining that there are lots of barriers as well, and how best we can address those barriers. Yeah, thanks. I think I'll let you use your mic for now. I'm not going to pass my mic, it's going to stay here.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, doesn't it work?
So the revenge, the revenge of the microphone.
Try again.
Yes,
We turned it off. Try now.
Hello? No, it's still not working.
So yeah,
Got a chair.
that's a dumb one.
If you don't mind. I think, again, sort of coming back to the personal level, for me, it's really easy to feel despondent and worried and hopeless. And for me, just doing things makes me feel better. So I think that there is resilience in that. And just thinking about sort of my healthcare work and going to Calais, which is a desperate situation, and it's terrible. And I've joined this tiny little organisation that I went before Christmas, and there were just 2 of us there. And we were seeing like 150 people a day. It's it's very unsustainable, really. But there are some really lovely things. We went to a chemist to buy some supplies, and they gave us a whole box full of things for free because they know what we're doing and they want to help. And I think it's important to remember that, like you were saying as well, that we're not the only ones who are worried about these things. And when I came back and I spoke about it at work, but I didn't speak about it at work because I wasn't sure what people would think. And then it was in the paper, and somebody saw it, and lots of people were really positive and said, "That's amazing. I'd like to come too." And I just think, finding the positives where we can and doing what we can makes us feel better.
Amen to that, absolutely. And I think what keeps me on the level is the allotment. Going through the gates of the allotment and all the hills of the world fade away. And in fact, I mean, as I'm sure most of you know, most people in the world are fed locally. 70%. It's the 30% industrialized parts of the world which are subject to the industrial food system, which is destroying the planet. And I'm sorry to end my previous thing on a very negative note about mass extinction and all that. That's not where I'm at. Where I'm at is absolutely what we can do locally, kind of things that Lofa was talking about. And I would just like to point you to this report by Tim Lang. And I wonder, Chair, if when I finish talking, I could just distribute that little note that I mentioned. This is it was done on request of the National Preparedness Commission that looked at all the things that the society in Britain needs to be prepared for, and they covered things like water and energy and war and famine and disease and so forth. And he, Professor of Food Policy, very, very able individual, popped up and said, "What about food?" Completely left out, as often the case in national policy making. And so he spent 2-3 years preparing this mammoth report, 385 pages. But for me, it's distilled down to one particular table, which I'll share with you in a minute, table 8.4. And in that, what he describes is what people can do themselves locally, and what kind of enabling factors are needed to be able to enhance that or make that happen. And I've scribbled some highlights, orange highlights in it, bits which really grabbed my attention. And I think that for me is absolutely what we need to. And what he says in his presentations is that for all he's talked about international national policy, actually nothing is going to happen unless we organise locally. Nothing's going to happen unless we can actually get things going locally and have resilience built in to our local, hyper-local, not just town, but possibly even local, ward level, so that people know where food is, where the soup kitchens are, who knows about growing food in their immediate area. As one woman said to me in a meeting, said, I'm not going to pay £3 to come from Long Wharf in the centre of Rugby on the bus to go to the food bank. I can't afford that. I want something which is local to me. So how we can organise hyper-locally, and we're sort of having little discussions about that. Loca's kind of involved in it as well, whether we can get something going in Rugby. But that's the thing I'd like to emphasise. And it's for me, a really positive message that all the good things that we're doing, which mirrors what is being done by billions of people around the world, with their seed saving, with their ecological food provision, the short food chains. I can give you examples from all over the world and some from the UK, where people are absolutely doing that and living healthily and well on that food system. Bringing that back into a Britain that is less dependent on the more of industrial food system. So let me separate that. You may have to share.
Okay, thank you. So, Patrick, would you like us to take a look at those sheets and then see if anybody in the audience has questions?
Or they can look at them
Or
and
you
ask
can just have a
after.
look and ask afterwards. Okay. So while you're having a look at those, one thing I would like to pick up, we've got a few people in the audience who are going to be in the musical interlude a bit later on. And the thing they are campaigning for is water rights and the rights of rivers. And I have to say personally, I don't think it might go as far enough, and in fact it should be nature rights. There's a very old book called Should Trees Have Standing, which was written in the early 90s. So that's just one thing to throw on the table as a possibility. But otherwise, it's definitely time somebody had a go at asking a question from the audience.
I was hoping to imitate Stratford Literary Festival and run around with a roving mic, and I've been waiting for my cue to do this. Does it work, Roger? Does it work?
Do I have to switch
To
this one
wait
off?
for Roger.
No,
He's going to flick a
Yeah.
switch.
Is that my fault? Did I switch it off?
No, borrow this one.
Would you like to take that mic? Yeah. while you're-
Try it, stand up, teacher.
Is it working? So, would anybody like to ask a question? Tony?
Two quick comments really. I'm Tony and I'm here for myself. Couple of comments, but I'll try the word negative, I'll try to make them a bit positive. One was open access in the countryside. I did a 2-day workshop on access with councils and the rest. Probably open access is the last thing you need, not the first. There are many complicated issues as to why people don't go into green spaces, and you need to deal with those first. And they're easy to deal with than to try and get open access. Turn it on its head and do it the other way around. The other thing is this wonderful word that we're really nature depleted. There is no scientific definition of nature depletion. It's a paper headline that came out of research by the British Museum with very sort of narrow form of data really. If you're a very populated country with a lot of agriculture, you're going to be bottom of that list, regardless of your nature. When it comes to biodiversity, we're not doing well. We could do much better, but we're about halfway up and down the league table when you pull it up or down. So I just think we need a bit more positive. We have nature, we need to make more of it. We're not the most nature depleted country in the world by a long way.
Hello. I have a question. A lot of what you were talking about advocating, bringing nature into the conversation, not separating from people. How do you balance that? Like, how do you argue and advocate for nature when you're in debates like these or other council, where people are seeing themselves separate from nature and arguing against it in a way for their own comfort or their own lifestyle? How do you balance that out to bring them back into the no, nature is part of it and everything? Like, yeah.
So does anybody want to pick that up? I can start with what happened in the gathering in March and then pass the mic along. So there's is it Sophie Tickell, who is pulling together councils in which individual people speak in the voice of particular species. And Phoebe Tickell, that's it. And well, it was 3 months ago. We've had I've done a lot since then. And what was interesting about that was it completely changed the quality of the conversation in the room as we started talking about the environment and rivers and keeping the environment clean for animals and worms and fungi and so forth. And that's not just a kind of wacky tree hugging idea. It's actually something that has been used in specific councils, several councils in the UK. So I think what's needed is a change in the quality of the discussion in everything from council meetings to academe to gatherings like this. But that's just a kind of starter, and everybody here might have a different view.
Are we commenting?
I know David wants to say something.
Okay.
Oh, David.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask a question actually,
Okay.
which was about political structures. I mean, none of you've mentioned political structures. I think that ownership structures in the country are a part of political structure which is fantastically unequal. And I think that resilience must involve some decrease in inequality. And I wonder if the panel could suggest how we might work towards that.
This is good.
So I suppose this is, I just want to slightly push back on what Tony said first. And which sort of agrees with what you said. Of course, there are places in the countryside that humans should not go, but we live in, there's plenty of open space, and if people don't have more access, they're not going to care, and they feel disenfranchised, and that the sort of sorry to mention it again, but the rise of the far right is because people feel disenfranchised, and to make all the things that we've been mentioning, the community-based things, will make people feel more enfranchised. And to come back to David's question, one of the mechanisms to do that, as well as community benefit society, but in political structures, are citizens' assemblies, and it is a growing movement, and I'm hoping one day we'll get one in Stratford.
Yeah, and I think also as part of the political structures, I think what there's a lot of there's a call now for, I mean, clearly the devolving the part to giving more power to local councils and authorities, really, in terms of both resourcing and staffing and budget, to actually support community activities would be one of the priorities, I think, which needs to change, because clearly we might have a national strategy in place. I mean, that is quite, doesn't take into account of what we can do. But one of the measures they suggest have been put forward in our national food security strategies, or even the national climate action strategies, as how can we give more. One of the key mechanisms is actually enabling local authorities to support what is happening at the community level. So having more power, more distribution of power across people, empowering actually people at the community level. Even community efforts may not go far if they do not have the resources or the capacity to do it, because clearly there's a lot of, I mean, that you can only run as little as you can with volunteers, and may not be sustainable in the long run. So I think a change in political structures would be actually acknowledging, not just acknowledging, but enabling organizations which operate at the local level. It could be local, it could be regional as well, because some of these issues, what we are talking about, may not be just met by one particular city or a town. Like maybe you need to have much more regional approach. For example, in Coventry, we're looking at a West Midlands strategies. So similarly here you might have a bigger, because environmental issues don't respect city boundaries. So we need to look at a regional approach. So political structures which look at a much more regional, provide a much more regional perspective, because ultimately what happens in Stratford will depend on what happens in Leamington and what's happening in Rugby. So we are all interconnected in that way. So at least in my research, we have been pushing for a much more regional, a more territorial perspective, both in terms of, because food systems normally includes, as for those, if you have not come across this term, it's basically you're looking at right from production to processing, manufacturing, retail, wholesale, right from food coming right from the farm to the plate. So we are thinking of all those, that entire chain, and how do we build resilience in that chain. And so therefore they might extend outside of Stratford, for example. There might be manufacturing going on which brings food into Stratford, but not necessarily located. So in terms of political structures, one, in my understanding, is enabling local level institutional mechanisms need to be paid or given much more support than what we have so far. And clearly, I think one of the issues we have now is again a very fragmented silos, even different politics. The right, the left, and middle and central, and whatever they have, they all seem to have different positions, but ultimately, I mean, everyone agrees, I think, at least in theory and principle, that we need food, we need environment. It's just that they have different ways of approaching it, and maybe there should be much more. I think they say that in the parliament, isn't it? There should be some issues where it has to cut across party lines. It is not about the right or the left or the middle or the center. I've stopped keeping track of what the different ideologies are, but essentially look at it as one central issue that will affect all of us in ways which would really cut across party lines. So again, for me, another point is no party lines, simply no party politics when it comes to food and the environment, having much more say in that, and maybe locals really making sure that this actually is implemented as well, not just in paper, because always sometimes it's very much easy to have plans and strategies, but then they're really not. So I think again, making sure that there's accountability in the political teams or the political structures that we build. I mean, ultimately we are electing people to the politics. Who comes from to the politics? It's us. We are putting people into power who don't care. So it's ultimately the responsibility is with us again to make sure that the political structures are supportive. And if we don't, it's again us. Okay, over to you.
I think health equity is very much linked to inequality. So I was talking to a friend of mine recently who's a GP in a city area in Scotland, and she was saying she doesn't have any patients over 100. And in Warwick Hospital, we regularly see people at 105, 106 who are still living independently. So it's a massive change. And what I've been thinking about is sort of personal responsibility for our health. I feel like we've lost a lot of knowledge and confidence in looking after ourselves. And I don't know, I just remember my grandmother making potions from the garden and treating this and that, and my mother kind of poo-pooing over it. I think it's great. And again, sort of health equity across the world. There are massive problems. Like in Sudan, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are living on less than 300 calories a day. It's a huge disaster that's just unfolding. And I'm sort of conscious that the sort of healthcare that I've been giving in Calais is really basic, because it's the kind of thing that we would be doing at home. If you have a cold, we'd be using albus oil and this and that, but people who don't have those resources can't do that. And so we just thinking about how we can support our communities to look after ourselves collectively.
So, nature depletion, take the point, but that is also echoes what I was saying, that the industrial food production model, industrial agriculture, has become ever more concentrated, not just in single species, but in single varieties over massive acreages. And a system which is more agroecological would clearly be much, much better. And you can have this coexistence, you can have sharing of space rather than dividing space between industrial food production and nature, sharing of that space and have nature absolutely in the centre. DEFRA sort of tried to do something on it. And I was talking to Angela Eagle yesterday. She's now shifted to defence or something. Anyway, but she was in DEFRA and she was pushing that line and trying to do something, but not really effectively, not convinced that deindustrialising the production model to something much more diverse. The little raised bed that we maintain for the Borough Council in Central Park in Rugby is about 3 square metres, and I think we have 30 varieties in it. A bit excessive, but I mean, it makes the point. You can have really biodiverse stuff in smaller, and it produces loads of good quality food. Resilience, yes, absolutely, and talking about the structures which, but I was chairing a meeting some years back, and somebody popped up and said, well, actually, the barons believe that their system is the most resilient. They're the ones who can absolutely control everything that happens in their area. And so the views of what resilience is varies. It depends on who you talk about, but in the sense that you mean, absolutely, one has to be thinking, I think, much more about structures which enable that. And the right-hand side of that table, which I circulated to you, shows the sorts of things the local authorities could do to help develop. But the one I really want to focus on is your comments about how do you make people aware, and for me it's kind of a no-brainer. Zillions are paid to TV companies and magazines and all sorts of social media to convince us to eat very unbiodiverse food, usually ultra-processed, and advertise foods that are being farm-friendly and happy smiling cows on the outside with no controls about what that means. And getting people just to understand that every time they eat something, that they are eating part of nature, and get people to really recognise that, as Michael Collins says, eating food is a political act. And if one can get, from the youngest kids all the way through, just thinking, how best can we tell these kids that you can have lots of very, very biodiverse, 7,000 species of food species in the world, and we focus on 3: maize, wheat, and rice, as being the dominant providers of calories across the whole world, and the dominant consumers of research monies, by the way. It's crazy. There is so much diversity out there, even here in Warwickshire, and we could encourage people to be eating a much wider variety of foods. And I think that begins to address the issue that you just mentioned. I think there's lots going on in Warwickshire, which is really good. Lots going on in Rugby, which is fantastic. And I think we just have to build on these realities, and that people recognising when they eat better food, particularly that which is grown locally in short supply stations, they will have better lives and better well-being, particularly if they've got an allotment plot.
Can I just add something to what Patrick just said now? One is, I think, to understand that there's a difference between resilience and sustainability. All sustainable systems are necessarily resilient because they have to be, but all resilient systems are not necessarily sustainable because you can, so that's what he was referring to. So there are different ways in how resilience has been understood. So in common understanding, the industrial long supply chains have been very resilient, because that's why we have not, and Julie asked why agroecology has not moved as fast as we think we should have, because the industrial supply chains and the entire mechanisms, or in the entire way in which that operates, has been strongly resilient to actually to allow other systems to flourish. So therefore agroecology is the number of barriers to why agroecology is not moving as fast as would expect it to be, because of concentration of power and again our way of how people, as people of societies, we have been conditioned to have food available to us 24 hours of the day, and food which is not seasonal. So we have been conditioned to expect hundreds of choices. We need 20 types of salad, even though 20 types of salad don't get sold in supermarkets. People invariably pick up 2 or 3 types, but the producers are, but the supermarkets want to supply 20, because that's what we have been sold on now, that we need choice. We need 30 types of things which we don't necessarily buy. So there's a lot of food waste in the system. So there's a difference between resilience and sustainability, which we need to keep in mind. That's one thing. And the other thing, in response to your, how do we make these changes? These changes have to happen at different levels, because as I say, it's a societal responsibility. Not any one particular group can actually make the change that we need. So in terms of what Patrick was saying, allotments, schools are having allotments now. We have a movement in sort of growing movement, emerging movement in Coventry, where school allotments are being used for gardening, for growing food. So where children are learning about where food comes from, and not just where food comes from, what happens to food after school, how does it move, how does it go from here to there, and who is it going to, how is it reaching the supermarkets, and then what happens to the food if people don't buy. So through these initiatives, school gardening is something which is coming up, and I think possibly, many of you who must have been there long time back, they had that part of the school curriculum, and that has been stopped for gardening and growing. So I guess there are a number of ways by which we can address increasing awareness and taking measures around improving our resilience to disruptions. One quick point, Julie, I was thinking it's very important to keep in mind what Patrick was saying about biodiversity. And we are talking about biodiversity as a major concern, because that's what is impacted mainly by climate change. Climate change is a huge risk, because if you don't have biodiverse diets, biodiverse planting, any particular climate change or flooding might wipe out completely one crop or 2 crops, and you won't have food. So especially biodiversity and the risks of climate change is very strongly linked. Without biodiversity, we may not actually have enough ways to cope with climate change impacts. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so thank you very much, panelists, for an extremely good discussion, and thank you everybody here for your really good questions. Time is racing away, and it's about 8 minutes past 1 now. The next thing that will happen, we have a break now. At 2 o'clock, we'll reconvene for the speech, the keynote speech of the day. The heading is already up there. I understand that Rupert Reed, who is around somewhere, oh yes, there, has books on sale. The other thing I want to mention is 29th of July, National Emergency Briefing is happening in the Arts House, Robert Street at 6:30 p.m. And the other thing to look at is there are displays from the Net Zero Hub Stratford Climate Action and from the Town Council, from Jenny Fradley. There's a display over there. There's also some artwork Rosemary brought in from Warwick University, which is just outside the door to the right. And the other thing to remember is there is a musical event happening at 4:30, but we'll mention that a little bit later.